Welcome, everyone, to the Rogue Thoughts podcast. Today, our guest is Brent D. Sadler. He has served in the U.S. Navy for over 26 years as a Navy captain, working on intelligence operations and advising senior defense leaders. He is now a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and he's doing naval warfare and advanced technology at the Heritage Foundation, which looks at maritime security and the technologies that are shaping future maritime forces. He's also an author who has wrote U.S. Naval Power Rebuilding America's Advantage at the Sea. Welcome, Brent.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. So I guess my first question is, what initially inspired you to join the Navy?
Oh God. It starts with a childhood in Asia, growing up in the 80s and in the island of Guam, and then also high school in Japan. And so I had friends that were in Tiananmen Square. They were Americans, but they were there. They were in those days you could go see. And the day before the massive crackdown, the massacre, they were there. And so that and one probably very formative trip to mainland China in 1985 into southern China in Shenzhen and but Guangzhou prefecture. Then it was just farmlands and dirt roads, but it was very clear that the Chinese Communist Party was a very oppressive force. Even still, in the beginning of the opening up, everyone was in white malled suits. No one would talk to you without a very guarded kind of action. And we had minders the whole time. And one kid, he must have been a high school student or equivalent, kind of looked around as we're on the street and came up to me, kind of hiding his hand and shook my hand and said, "I love America," and then walked off. And so that, and then things that transpired, the people power movement in the Philippines that deposed Marcos. Marcos came through Guam while I was there, on his way to Hawaii and is, being, sent away. And then, of course, the Tiananmen Square massacre, which was something that we were getting daily reports and people who were there, we were hearing from. So these are the things that shaped my mind that Asia was a very important region, that the United States sometimes gets it wrong, and we needed people that understood innately and grew up in the region. So that was my reason for being, was getting it right, building up strong friendships in the region, alliances, but also trying to prevent what's become sadly a much more too real potential for a major war between the United States and China. This is my reason for being, is to try to prevent that, but strengthen the United States in the process.
So when you say getting it right, what has America done wrong and what does getting it right look like to you?
Oh God, the first one that really still chaps me, and I lost a very lucrative scholarship when I was in college because I stood my ground on this, because I'd grown up and gone to school in Japan. Some of your viewers may not know this, but back in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a series of books that were basically saying, the coming war with Japan. And there was this crazy notion, and it was crazy then, it's still crazy, that Japan was going to go to war with the United States and that its trade supremacy, economic supremacy was such that it was a national security threat. And I didn't know it at the time, the author of one of those books, but also very an ardent believer of this. Japan and the United States are treaty allies. The United States and Japan have so many common national security and national interests in common, democracies. We're very interested in free and open markets and trade. We both have a lot of interest in preventing, at the time, proliferation of nuclear weapons, prevention of conflicts, prevention of terrorism. This was early days, of course, but we had too much in common. Some folks, for whatever reason, were building a narrative that were casting us as enemies. It made no sense then. And that was a case of not getting it right. Too many people in Washington, D.C. were taking the bait on that. And that's one a case of doing it right, is kind of understanding what the reality is on the ground, and acting accordingly.
Who wrote that book, if you don't mind me asking? Because I've never heard of a book like that. That's quite fascinating.
It was all the rage. I can't remember the author, though I met him and lost my scholarship because of that, because I took him to task and I was just a college student. I was very respectful. There was no yelling and shouting, but I can't remember. But the title of the book was "The Coming War with Japan." If you search for that online, it's still out there, and every once in a while, people reference it. Some reference it as hey, an example of a flawed and analysis, and others will say, "Hey, it was the wrong country. It was China that we should have been writing about." They're probably more right about that, but
So, what does a better relationship look like today with you, in your view, with China then?
the first thing is we need to be guided not by ideology or best intentions, but hard reality of actions. The Chinese Communist Party is not our friend. They have a different value structure. They have a different worldview. They are also very hungry. They want to be the preeminent power in the world, and the United States should not cede that without a contest, and make sure that Americans and American interests are always answered first. So first and foremost, we need to be very realistic about what the Chinese Communists are, and Chinese Communist Party specifically, that lead China, and deal with them accordingly with very open eyes and not be naive.
So, having said that, you've been in government service for over 20 years. Have you seen the Navy specifically transition to a better way or a worse way? Are we getting outpaced by foreign competitors?
Yeah, the best story on this one is I started having a platform where I could actually engage very senior leadership and inform them from about 2010 when I was doing some very background projects for the White House, for the secretary or the chief of naval operations at the time. And it was clear that we needed to change to a more competitive posture, not one where we're looking for a new Cold War or where we weren't trying to isolate China from all engagements across the world, but that we needed to call them out when they were doing things that were malign, bad, and then more forcefully advocate for American interests. The watershed event, that was 2010. The watershed event that things started to change was when the Chinese and the Filipinos were stuck in a standoff at Scarborough Shoal in the spring of 2012. And the National Security Council under President Obama at the time, Kurt Campbell was one of them, went out and they negotiated basically a withdrawal. The problem was the Chinese have never withdrawn. They basically reneged on the deal. The folks that were looking at China as a responsible stakeholder, some of your listeners may be familiar with this characterization of what China should be. It was clear that they were anything but that. They reneged on the deal. They stayed and they, to this day, effectively control Scarborough Shoal, a feature that's in the South China Sea that is clearly Filipino.
So, if you were in charge, what would you have done instead? How would you have made them withdraw, or would you have done something different?
I would have actually been much more clear with our military presence to say we're there as a guarantor of the implementation of the deal. We didn't do that. We thought that was escalatory at the time. We thought that was unnecessary because we could trust the Chinese. So this is where the realism and the Navy is a very different. The way our government operates since it's taken a few other cases, crises to kind of get us to I think a much more rational, realist approach to dealing with the Chinese Communist Party. Um, so we've changed and learned.
And through changing and learning, would you say it's because of all these failed attempts where they renege on deals, or was it more from a policy standpoint of we're not going to tolerate any kind of things like that from any foreigners?
Well, the first thing I'd say it was delicate at first, but it's been much more pronounced. If you go all the way back to President Obama's rebalance to Asia Pacific, and you look at President Trump's free and open Indo-Pacific, which is really influenced by Prime Minister Abe's similar framing, a strategic framework, there's a continuity in American strategic views. The language and kind of the tempo or the context in which we execute that diplomacy has gotten much more explicit. One would say more harsh, but I would say explicit, easy to understand by Beijing. But the direction's been the same. America is an Indo-Pacific power, has been since its birth, and it will remain so. And we will stand up for international law, and we will stand up for our rights given within that. And so that message, that focus, that direction has remained consistent, but it's become much more, I guess, bolstered with stronger diplomatic language, willingness to use economic statecraft, but also a clear military presence nearby to show that we are serious about what we say.
With that being said, the military presence, as far as I know, the U.S. naval fleet has gone down in the amount of ships they've had. in the last 20 years or so, do you think that in order to continue our supremacy, we need to build up our ships, or do you think we need certain ships that are specific to every kind of scenario?
Yeah, well, the first thing I say, it's not necessary for supremacy, though you would want a lot larger military overall if you wanted to be the supreme military power against any adversary or groupings of adversaries. But I think a larger navy is needed just to secure our national interest and to secure Americans' livelihood here as well as over there in Asia and the Middle East and Latin America. So a bigger navy is necessary. The Seventh Fleet, which I used to work for, as the flag lieutenant for the admiral in charge, it's clearly been a priority for many years to maintain its size at about 50 to 70 ships. There are ships that are based in Japan, so they're always there. That actually grew during my time helping execute the rebalance to the Asia Pacific. It continues to grow, but it puts a stress on everywhere else in the world that the Navy has to be.
When you say it puts a stress on it, do you think, as far as us domestically, if we were to be, I guess, hit on the Atlantic side and the Pacific side, is our Navy ready for some sort of battle like that if it were ever to come?
The thinking is there. The operational muscle memory to do that is not. So there'd be like an initial kind of shock, but there are lots of options. I mean, you can watch it in the Caribbean. We have a carrier strike group that's in the South China Sea as we speak, and another one that's in the North Pacific. So we have vessels around the world with quite a significant strike power, but in a fight that's not good enough. In a war, that is. And if we're really gonna not break our sailors, like have them out at sea for 10 months at a time, we need more ships. That's not sustainable.
And if, let's say, you were in charge, how would you get more ships and how would you strategically place them and where they need to be?
Yeah, we have to take an "and" approach. We have to focus in on how do we get more ships built like destroyers, submarines, and aircraft carriers. They take 3 to 5 years at best in a stable design. So we need to be growing the industrial capacity to build those ships, hold the shipbuilders accountable, get them also the resources, because you can't hold them accountable if you didn't give them the resources that they are needed to build the ships intelligently and based on best engineering principles. But we also, and here's the "and," we have to look at some very creative, innovative solutions to get firepower downrange now. That's not that we're going to start launching missiles from, but the Chinese count missile tubes on ships at sea as part of the military balance. And so we very quickly could change things to make them pause any thoughts of a conflict this decade. And we're going to have to use unmanned vessels as missile platforms. And I would say there's a very easy use case for that in the Philippine Sea right now. Back in April of 2021, an unmanned vessel launched a Standard Missile 6. This is something that can be used to take out aircraft, but also cruise missiles launched off of Southern California.
Huh. As far as policy and shipbuilding, you said to hold the shipbuilders more accountable and get them the materials they need. Do they have a struggle in building the ships because of the lack of materials we provide, or is it a combo of there is a lot of scrutiny in building a ship and getting those materials in general is difficult?
It's a combination of things, and there are no angels in this story, by the way. There's some devils, but no one's clean, so to speak, on this one. Um, the first thing is shipbuilders are a business. They're publicly traded business, the ones that build destroyers and warships and everything else. And so they have to answer to their shareholders, Wall Street. Now, Wall Street doesn't care about capital investments. They don't care about China. They care about money. And that's how we like it. We're a capitalist society. I like that too. But we're getting to a situation where the the way that doing business like that is a danger to our national security. So we have to change things. And the way you change it is not by directing a profit-seeking entity that only exists based off of profit margins, very slim ones, mind you, but by changing the incentive mechanism. And so for the shipbuilders, we need to do a couple things. One, Congress needs to actually pass budgets and actually continue to grow the shipbuilding budgets. Building ships ain't cheap. And whenever you try to do it on the cheap, you have bad things happen. So pay what it costs, build the ships. Get the money into the budget and get it into the shipbuilders so they can make the appropriate investments. The other thing Congress needs to do on that, change the incentive structure, do what the Estonians did to great effect. Do something what's called a distributed profit tax. And what you do there is you incentivize investment in your workforce and in your infrastructure. Things that we need to do. We don't have enough shipyard workers. We don't have enough dry docks. We don't have enough cranes. We don't have enough capacity to build nuclear submarines. It's why we are in the state we are. So, what a distributed profit tax does is it says, all right, Huntington Ingalls, you made $10 billion in profit last year. By the way, they don't make that much in profit, but I'm using a round number to make a case. A distributed profit tax would say, okay, Huntington Ingalls, of the $10 billion of profit that we would tax at like a 40% or 35% rate, whatever the rate is this day for that value, we're gonna let you get no tax for that portion of it that you invest back into your workforce and that you invest into your infrastructure to buy cranes, to grow your waterfront capacity to build ships. You can write that off, full expensing, tax free. Boom. But if you take 2 billion of that and you do stock buybacks or dividend payments, well, that's a profit that we will tax, and we're going to tax it at a higher rate. So the idea is to incentivize the movement into long-term strategic investments that we need as a nation these industries to be making.
Having said that, that sounds very smart. Why do we not do that? Is it because we're too capitalistic, or is it more so that public policy and scrutiny and things like that?
Oh, it's still capitalist. I mean, it's from Estonians. The Estonians are very capitalistic after they shuck free of the Soviets
Fair enough.
and their communistic ways. It's a very capitalistic approach, and it's a proven approach. I think part of it is people just didn't think about it. We're very used to in this town thinking about subsidies, about tax credits, or just outright give money to Navy and the Navy goes and buys all the equipment for the shipbuilder. That's not a very that's a very suboptimum approach, to say the least. Better to let the business and the engineers working for the shipbuilder make the decisions themselves, how best to invest in the workforce, how best to invest in their infrastructure to build the ships on time and at cost. This actually gets government out of the way, quite frankly. Um, but I think there's just not enough awareness of it. So I'm constantly hammering it in my engagements with staff, senators, Congress members. I bring this up whenever I can because I think it's just not awareness. It's not a story that's well known.
Do you feel like your point is getting across to your colleagues and congressmen and the people who can make the change?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Just a quick a shift. So, being as you were a naval captain, an expert in maritime, how does the U.S. identify a potential threat at sea? Like, was there a specific process they go through, or how do they get a positive ID on a threat?
Well, it really matters on where and what the issue at hand is, and then it gets really into the high security and classification about what systems and what signals and things like that. But suffices to say that normally when if you're going to use, if we're talking about lethal force, that's a different. That this is the high level standard. And we're not going to touch the legal aspect, but just okay, make sure you're going to go after bad guys that you mean to go after. Um, there's electronic signals, there's communications, there's history and knowledge and familiarity with ships and aircraft that are operating in, say, a water space. And then there is simple visual. Like you have an aircraft that's flying overhead and you look at it and you can say, yeah, that boat just took on a bunch of Russian oil, or it's a North Korean ship that's moving coal to a Chinese bulk carrier at sea, or it could be drug cartels moving cocaine across the Caribbean. So you can look at it, and there's very good optics out there. I think a lot of that you can see day to day now from the briefings that we're getting out of the Pentagon.
And from all those possibilities, is there a chain of command in a process in which everyone goes through to identify that threat? I mean, granted, we have satellite images and things like that. Do we also take an extra step to verify if those boats are actually carrying that oil from the satellite image, perhaps, or is there a different approach?
Well, I mean, I don't know exactly what's going on behind the curtain on this, so I can't, and I wouldn't be able to because that would be extremely sensitive. But
Sure.
if you look at how the war against ISIS was run, there was a legal process called a presidential finding. And what that meant is it would the president for outside of the United States, because American legal dictate is only where we have effective control or inside the United States and its territories. International waters is not U.S. territory. And the law of the United States doesn't reign supreme. So you're not going to go out there and arrest someone and bring them back to the United States. You could, but that's not the world that we're in many cases, and certainly not with the drug cartels. So if it is like what was done with ISIS, and there's indications by statements made by the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, that this is the model that they're using. So the president would make a finding, say these are bad guys killing or harm a threat to the United States. They are outside our jurisdiction, like our legal jurisdiction. Lethal force is authorized, and usually that would come with a case to say here's all the data, and it can move very fast, as we know during the war on terror.
So, follow up with that. Now that we have this current situation between Colombia and Venezuela, where those three allegedly civilian ships that were shot with missiles that were quote unquote fishermen, but we have reports saying that they were actual drug cartel smugglers.
Yes.
How do we, or how does anyone go about figuring out the full story?
I think there's more than enough data. This is not a court of law. This is the real world that we're dealing with. And so, knowing, and again, we have decades of operational experience with these cartels. What boats, which peoples, which waterfronts, and we have friends in the region too. It's not just the United States versus the cartels. It's quite frankly a large network of like minded nations in Latin America that have been working together to try to stop the business of these narco cartels. So it's not a surprise that we know who these people are. We know what boats they're on. We know what routes they're on. Is it all of them? That's a different story.
So you said boats and routes. So there are known routes and then known, I guess, type of boat that these cartel members use to smuggle the drugs in.
Yeah. It's
And
not it's not a it's not a I mean, sometimes they even know the folks. I mean, they might arrest them and then they go back and they get recycled. They go back home and they get recycled back into it. The boats themselves sometimes are sunk, sometimes are get by, but they're watched. Like you can't interdict them, but you see them and you can't quite get someone there to take them out because if you're going to try to arrest them, you got to go stop them. And if you're talking about hundreds of these things moving a trade worth almost $1 trillion, this is cocaine as well as marijuana as well as fentanyl. That's $1 trillion, I'm sorry, $1 trillion trade. Just cocaine is about $700 billion. So that's a lot of boats. And so you have to be placed and you have to go get on board. So at the best of times, the Joint Interagency Task Force South, working with probably about, I think it's like 26 countries in the region and also Europe that has uh, territories in the Caribbean. At best, they were only taking out perhaps 10% of the boats that were moving. So
wow.
insignificant for the cartels. They clearly have built that into their business model. So when you start sinking the boats, that means you don't have assets to go arrest them. You can actually put a real severe dent into their business model.
So operationally, you're saying that they would use several hundreds of these boats, knowing that 10%, 15, whatever the percent may be, are going to not get away, but still making away with 90% to smuggle those drugs in.
To be clear, I'm not saying it's like a swarm. It's not like it's
No,
like a
yeah.
tidal wave. Them all go out like in a mass, but it's like constant, like one here, one there. They're all over the place, because it's very disaggregated. And to get one, it takes a lot. If you're going to go interdict it and stop it, just one, you have to pick your fights very carefully because it takes a lot of assets to do that. And clearly, at the best of times, we were interdicting about 10% of the trade, the over the ocean.
For sure. So from an operational standpoint, how would you change it if you think there needs to be a change? What would be a different approach to take to get more of them out of the water?
Well, I think, I mean, now that the band-aid's pulled off and we're sinking these things, that's the most effective use of limited resources. Again, these are bad guys. These are not friends of the United States or civilians that we're talking about. So again, set the legal argument aside. If you start with the assumption and can agree that this is a threat, they are killing Americans, and that they are valid targets. Using limited military resources and sinking the ships is the probably the most operationally effective use of limited resources. To really try to drive the cartels out of business, you're going to have to cut a large portion of their trade, their cargo movement, both in the Atlantic as well as in the Pacific, to do this, to basically put them out of business. I don't know how much capital reserves they have, but if they gonna go like locusts and they bury underground and they try to weather this, this may be a long-term enduring thing that we're talking about. Clearly, they're still sending their drug runners out to sea, and they're being attrited, to use a military term.
So I've read reports that Trump has sent actually a fleet out towards them now, is almost like a, I guess, a blockade as you describe it, and that he's put I believe it's the USS Ford now in the carrier ship in the sea to stop any other ways for them to go in and out. Correct me if I'm wrong, of course.
Yeah.
Is that a good move by him, or from a strategic and operational standpoint, is that the wise move, or how else would he handle it?
So I think the Ford's still in the Mediterranean.
Okay.
She's not out yet, but we have other aircraft carriers. I think to way to view the heavy military presence, it's more of a deterrent to the Maduro regime to say, don't try to take a shot at U.S. forces because we will strike back, and it will be a very harsh response. So I don't see the aircraft carrier, the heavy naval presence, as what's necessary to sustain the interdiction at sea. The Special Forces commercial repurpose ship that's out there, the Ocean Trader, that's out and around the Caribbean and the Outer Antilles, that ship does support interdiction, and you can use Special Forces to go out and take out these drug runners. You should have something similar in the Pacific, and I've advocated for a type of platform, repurposing platforms to do just this. So you can actually cover the waterways in a very enduring way. You don't need aircraft carriers to do that. That would probably be overkill. Um, but special forces on at sea bases, backed up with a few warships, just to make sure that if a hostile regime, say Venezuela, decides to come out to try to attack our forces that are operating international seas, going after these cartels, that we have the ability to deter them from taking that action. The idea is not to go to a war, but to actually put the cartels out of business. If the Maduro regime's not able to make ends meet and they end up collapsing because they can't survive without the cartels, then that means that's an evil regime to begin with and probably shouldn't be in responsible leadership of any country.
So you said about repurposing ships. What is, just for the audience, what kind of ships would be repurposed, and how is that a process we would go through?
Well, the Ocean Trader, I think, was a container ship that was, or a commercial ship that was repurposed years ago to support special forces off the Horn of Africa to go after Somali pirates and also to help interdict Iranian arms shipments to the Houthis in Yemen. Um, there's two vessels, they're called Expeditionary Sea-Based Docks, ESDs, that were put into a reduced status. The John Glenn, which is in California right now, it's been sitting in a mothball status. The other one has been in a reduced active status, and that's the Montford Point, and that's in Norfolk, Virginia. It's actually out at sea doing other type of science projects for the Department of War now, but not this mission. It's a big ship. It was a tanker that they cut the midsection out and they put like a deck that they could lower it into the water so boats could come up on board and they could refuel or do maintenance, but they could also support drones from these ships as well.
Speaking of drones, since you brought that up, how has drones and AI changed the way America uses their naval force and identifies or even attacks a enemy?
Yeah. Well, we'll see how effective it is in the complex environment of the Caribbean and even the Eastern Pacific from the drug going after these cartels. So you can have a lot of sensors, and if it's digital, and everything is digital these days, then you can apply AI algorithms and you can start to very rapidly pick out patterns of behavior. You say, okay, these boats are acting like trawlers. The way they behave in this water, this time of year, they clearly are acting like trawlers, so not a threat. But these other boats, they're like on a high speed transit. They're kind of doing some weird behavior. They seem like they're probably high probability drug runners. So the artificial intelligence with the massive amounts of data that are coming in from sensors, digitalized data, it helps the human being, the operational guy or gal, to say to direct limited resources where the bad guys are. So rather than chasing down fishing boats, you're able to go after the bad guys much quicker. That's the use of AI. I think it's probably being employed now, but we'll see when the dust settles after, probably years later, we'll hear about it.
Do you think that using that type of AI and however else AI advances is gonna make us more effective, or do you think that there will be too much AI dependency where we are almost not making the decision anymore, we're just letting AI choose for us?
Yeah, it's a very real danger. The human in the loop, could become too over reliant to take at face value what's being told is the right decision to make. Um, so this is where the man and the machine have to be a team, and both have to challenge each other to ensure that we don't ever fall into that gap. The machine could take what the human being is telling just at face value. The smart machine needs to also query back and say, "Are you sure? That looks like a fishing boat." And then the human's like, "No, I'm looking at it. Those are bales of cocaine. It's trying to act like a fishing boat. It ain't a fishing boat." So there has to be a conversation, literally, and I use that words because that's kind of what it is, between the human operator and the artificial intelligent machine that's in there. So we have to guard against that. It's a real danger. It's been documented for decades, even back with automation starting as early as the 70s.
Is one country further ahead than the other in this battle, or as America, are we losing this battle, would you say?
Well, I think we're ahead in some ways, but we're behind in others. The reality is, it matters on how you use it. Um, it's not purely a race of processing power or the laydown of massive sensors, but it's how well you have that human being operator teamed with the unmanned systems. Who can do that better for specific uses, like maybe going after drug runners might be a good use case for it. Could also be analyzing market trends to figure out the next shipping route for moving rare earths in the global marketplace. It matters on how you use it. Um, and so it's hard to answer that like a definitive, we're winning the race on AI. I would, it's much more nuanced than that.
Okay, so where do you think we're ahead and where do you think we're behind then? How about that?
So I think we're behind on volume. Like, we haven't really put a lot of different systems out there to try to figure out what works. So it's early days. So the Chinese have clearly, they're doing an all of the above approach. They'll put out lots of different platforms, lots of different approaches, see what works best, and then they'll double down on what appears to work. But they haven't really shown the man and machine teaming um, at scale at sea or downrange. They had an exercise where they were doing a mock amphibious landing with like robot dogs and stuff. They're probably going to learn a lot through that, but we'll see how they improve it. Uh, for the U.S. on our part, Task Force 59 was stood up back in like 2021, early 2022, in CENTCOM. And that was a network of unmanned vessels to lay down a sensor network in the Arabian Sea, the Arabian Gulf, and the Red Sea. Still ongoing. That's a lot of real world experience and knowledge with the people and the machines and maintaining them that we have a lead on. So we have a lead on that, the actual using of it, use case.
You said they're laying down a sensor network. What does that mean specifically? As in, like they're trying to map out the area, or
Oh, it's mobile. It's like, so the best case is, if you're familiar with sail drone, it looks like a small sailboat, but
okay?
it's a hard sail and with a decking. So it basically moves around the ocean. It's got cameras, radar. It has a speaker on it to yell at people that get too close to it. But it's just kind of sailing around, and it's just observing. It's just like, hey, I see, this is what I see, and it's got radar. It's got the ability to kind of sense the environment that it's around and then tell headquarters what it's seeing. So that's kind of like a sensor network. It's not like building buoys that are fixed to the ocean floor. That's the
But
Chinese are doing that in the South China Sea, mind you, but
would you
we don't
compare
have
it
to do
to
that.
a would you compare it to a satellite in space, almost only in the ocean?
It's different. The satellite's not gonna ever get you the type of fidelity.
Okay.
I mean, when you're on a sail drone, you're looking at something that's like 1,000 meters away. That's in the ocean, that's really close. So you're looking at it, you can see the people, you might even hear them talking as they go by, and you're building up a pattern of behavior because, again, all of that's digitized. So these things are kind of in and amongst the patterns of life that are at sea.
Throughout your experience, um, obviously, all these situations and potential conflicts that come about, have you seen that diplomacy with one country, whether if you want to name that country or not, has been difficult compared to a different country? Like, I would imagine ones that are allies make a joint effort in identifying the threat or figuring it out, whereas China, for example, reneges on deals.
Yeah. Um, well, we're getting smart about understanding how the Chinese do business. Contracts are never final, even after you sign them with this is something that goes back even before the Chinese Communist Party. It's a very fluid concept of contract law in China. And I think we've gotten our politicians and our political leadership and our policymakers have gotten smart to that. Dealing with the Chinese as who they are, not wishing them to be Westerners. They're not. And they're certainly not free market capitalist either. So the first thing is it's incumbent upon us and our allies to embrace the world as it is. We need to be realist. And I think the age of realism is back. And I think that's a safer place to be because when you're dealing in tangibles, then the people that aren't your friends can understand what you stand for, what your interests are, and act accordingly. They want to pick a fight with you. They mean to pick a fight with you. They want to work with you. They mean to work with you. But when you focus in on ideology, you focus in on very, very hard to nail down principles without tangible connection to the real world, all you do is sow confusion. And I've lived that as a military defense attache and dealing with many of our friends and not so friendly nations in Asia, but the greater Indo-Pacific. So there is a welcomeness to this very, very clear sighted American diplomacy, the language of our new diplomacy that I can definitely attest to firsthand.
With that said, so you know, we have a United Nations that governs countries' actions globally. Is there a way to govern the sea like that in any way, or do you think that it's so big, so vast, that's
Yeah.
a harder task to accomplish?
Sadly, in this world, it's still kind of jungle law. It's the rule of the strong. Um, and where there are vacuums, bad things happen. Just look at Argentina with the massive Chinese fishing fleets that are going in and poaching their fish stock. So you don't stop that by being nice or taking them to court. That it just doesn't work. It hasn't worked. So you have to be serious about your own rights and your own interests, and you have to back that up with a respectable amount of force. Doesn't mean you use it, just means if you don't follow, respect me, there will be a cost. Law is just a reflection of that and helps confine or constrain the worst of human behaviors, but it doesn't remove it from the existence. So, uh, I'm not a big fan of the UN for a host of reasons. They've become captive to special interests. That's no surprise. But I've also studied at the UN University in Japan, and so I've been able to look at them from the inside. There is good there, but I don't think it's the answer. They can be part of the solution, but they are not the answer. If you follow my language here, it's that they can be a part of the solution. Um, and so those dialogues, those engagements, of course, should proceed. But the United States needs to be much more proactive, arguing its case, and then rallying other like-minded countries to have a one voice in these multinational organizations. Doesn't mean we're constrained when they work against our national interest either.
Okay. And in that rally of coming together, do you think that there is a particular country that we should rally with to start off this
Yeah.
initiation, or has it already begun and we just don't hear about it enough?
When it comes to China and trying to ensure that we prevent a war, I mean, it's not in the UN. This is much more a gathering of nations, like-minded nations, that feel the threat from China. Likewise, the Philippines, Japan, and South Korea, all very clearly, and I would include Taiwan, obviously, all kind of share the same concerns as the target of China's military ire and threat. So it's not because the United States compelled them or made a compelling case to say, hey, we should all come together because it makes good sense. It had to do everything with what China's done. It's a reaction to China's very forceful military presence in the last 10 years. It's kind of forcing these groups together. In a more positive line, we need to do better for shipbuilding and shipping so that we're not over reliant on less than friendly countries, China being one of them, um, in sustaining our economies. And so countries like, again, Japan, Korea, but the Greeks, the Italians, the Brits, the Germans, all have common cause to try to do better for ourselves in building up our maritime industrial base. This is shipping, shipbuilding, and ports management.
Having said that, Taiwan is a great place to begin with, especially with your expertise. What exactly is going on in that area? Because you hear a lot of reports about, it belongs to China, or China will not allow people in, or China is in control of specifically the semiconductor industry there. And I think they have put out ships around Taiwan now, not to let things in or out. So, could you clarify what's going on there?
So, I mean, there's a long story, which I won't abuse you with, so I know the history going way back, and where it gets really interesting is the first Japanese intervention into Taiwan when it was never really firmly part of the dynasties based out of Beijing or even out of Xi'an or Wuhan or Shanghai. It was never really a part of China fully in a proper sense. So there were a bunch of tribes, there were pirates there, and the Japanese intervened. It was a horrible intervention in the late 1800s. So this is not an easy nut to crack. It's also not clearly the historical record is not clear that it was ever really a part of China. But now, fast forward, it's a reality that we should embrace. It is today. You've got Chinese people in mainland China that feel that Taiwan is a part of them. There's an unsettled civil war, but the nagging reality in Taiwan is the differences between the two across the Taiwan Straits is growing. It's not shrinking. It's growing. You have a communist authoritarian regime in Beijing. You have a free market democracy in Taiwan. They're not going to naturally align. And most the people in Taiwan don't consider themselves any more Chinese. They consider themselves, even if they're 100% ethnic Chinese, they consider themselves Taiwanese. And so the peaceful resolution is becoming less and less to Beijing's desire because they know that the Taiwanese are going to want to free. They're not going to settle for a communist society or one dominated. And they just have to look at Hong Kong to see how Chinese communist promises are broke. In there, it's supposed to be 50 years till 2049 before we start, not 2049, 50 years from 1997, 2047 before what you're, but so the Chinese reneged on a treaty with the Brits, but more importantly, with the Chinese that are in Hong Kong today. And they are effectively being clamped down under an authoritarian regime of the Chinese Communist Party's picking. So, yeah, there's no easy solutions here. And the sooner that there's an understanding, and for the United States, the understanding remains unchanged since the late 70s, early 80s. And perhaps the best is the declassified President Reagan's national security statement that said, look, our arms sales to Taiwan are conditioned on the threat from mainland China because it's in our national interest that the dispute across the straits is resolved peacefully. If it is resolved by force of arms, that is against our national interest and we will act accordingly. Clearest statement, it remains unchanged to this day. It's been declassified in black and white letter. I think it was in January of 2021.
So, ideally speaking, there will be no time where that's really going to change anytime soon because of how close mainland China is to them and how important Taiwan is to us.
Yeah, it's if anything, it's going to go to a very different. It's going to the mainland and Taiwan are drawing apart. Which again, if Beijing is smart and the Chinese Communist Party could see their way forward, they could find a much better future accommodation with all people in the region. But that's not the approach that they can take because they've bet their legitimacy on unifying forcefully, if necessary, Taiwan with mainland China.
Okay. So, do you think, since you said that they've betted so much on it, that they're willing to do anything and everything to keep Taiwan under their control as long as possible?
I think it's even more slippery than that. I think they're willing to do and they have done quite a lot of bad things. Um, to try to influence or to intimidate elections in Taiwan to go the way they want. That it doesn't really play out very well for Beijing, but they try, and they continue. So yeah, when it comes to this, it's more in the realm of reality for Beijing, for the Chinese Communist Party. It's trying to prevent the people in Taiwan from declaring themselves independent. That's that's the final straw. That's what they want to prevent. They don't want to go to war, but they also don't want to see Taiwan kind of acknowledge a de facto independence.
So, with that said, do you think this should even more so increase the United States' urgency to keep their maritime power as big as possible because of threats like this potentially?
Absolutely. The Chinese have been acting very confident and very belligerently for several years now in East Asia, the waters from South China Sea to East China Sea specifically. And that's a characteristic of confidence. They feel very confident in that they are correct and that they are more than capable of fighting and winning. Now, whether or not that actually happens is a different thing. Wars are perhaps the most unpredictable of human endeavors, but it doesn't matter what we think. It matters what they think in Beijing. And by getting more military power and creating more tighter networks of security alliances in Asia, it should cause Beijing's military planners pause. And that's the game of deterrence.
With that said, you sparked a thought in my head. Since China seems kind of hell bent on doing anything to maritimely or even in any sort of way weaken us, do you see them sending ships to this conflict in Colombia and Venezuela right now? Eh, Or is
They're,
that too
they're
drastic by them?
yeah, I think they are much more savvy players to do something that over. It's very far away, so we're going to see them for weeks before. And there's none that I'm aware of that are in the theater already. In Cuba and they visited Nicaragua. So did the Russians back last summer. So I'm not aware of any deployments inbound. That would be a bad move for a host of reasons for the Chinese to try to insert themselves. But our sailors and airmen will be able to see them, and they're not going to get like caught in a crossfire if that's a concern.
So even just from a military and strategic standpoint, it's a horrible move because you said of how easily they could see them coming.
Yep. Well, the other thing too is it very clearly aligns China with a narco regime, and the Chinese have put billions and billions of dollars into that economy and that regime. And if they want to save their investment, they'd need to distance themselves from Maduro. Otherwise, they're gonna if that regime collapses, all of their investment goes with that regime. So I could see the Chinese playing a much more shrewd move of trying to distance themselves and to safeguard their investments that are in Venezuela.
So how do you see the U.S. Navy in the next 5 to 10 years changing? I mean, of course, technologically, AI, everything, but what does it really look like from a day-to-day operations too?
To most people, they wouldn't really notice the difference on the surface. I think you're going to see much more teaming of unmanned systems. Uh, it'll become much more ubiquitous from aircraft carriers launching unmanned aircraft that are operating with like an F-18 or an F-35 manned aircraft to unmanned ships. Sailing in formation with manned ships will become much more common sight. There was a deployment back in late 2023, 24, with a squadron of these unmanned vessels to Japan, Guam, Australia, and back to the United States. I think you're going to start seeing more of that, more unmanned vessels being integrated. They're not going to be by themselves. They're going to be with other manned ships. I think that's probably the biggest visible change that you could probably expect to see in 5 years.
Okay. Um, Another hypothetical for you since you said that. If you were in the Oval Office today with President Trump and he asked you, how do we fix the shipbuilding? How do we
Mm.
increase the naval size? And how do we just continue to be the big maritime leader we are? What would you tell him?
First thing, get his captains of change in place. So the maritime administrator is one. Get that person in his office. Lean in and help work with Congress to get that confirmed. Get someone named and confirmed for Navy's lead shipbuilder. This is the assistant secretary for research, development, and acquisition. This is the lead shipbuilder for Navy, mind you. There's not a name, and there's no one put forward to go to Congress, and we're almost at a year since the election. So, uh, You got to get those people in place because those are the executives. And then I think the president should name a interagency coordinator that works directly for him because shipping, the maritime industry covers transportation, commerce, diplomacy at State Department, national security. So it's a pretty I mean, you can't just have that at the National Security Council. You can't have it just like out and about in the different cabinets. You got to have someone to help drive the issue forward. And so it's in legislation. It's been there for about a year and a half now in the Ships for America Act. It's not my idea, but it's one that I embrace. And the folks inside the White House with the Maritime Action Plan, I think, in the former executive order, do understand that there's a need for this.
And lastly, just to end on this note, is there anything you would like the general public to know about the Navy that maybe there's a misconception or something like that that they should know? Besides, of course, how hard it is to do the
And
job.
yeah, I mean, most people probably, it's a statement of the obvious. For sailors, when you're at sea, the ocean is unforgiving, so you're always near death. And so what matters is technical competency because if you don't know your ship or your aircraft, the ship sinks or the aircraft crashes into the ocean and then you're alone. And the ocean again is unforgiving. So she is ever present and always your enemy that can kill you in very quick fashion, especially as a submariner, moments from death all the time. I mean, this then you add in the adversaries and a hostile navy onto it. It's what sailors are built for, they're trained for, but again, it's a highly technical community and high competencies required. It's important to hammer that point home that it's important and it doesn't come cheaply, both in blood, sweat, and certainly not in dollars.
Thank you very much for your time, Brett. I greatly appreciate it. Everyone, Brett D. Sandler with the Heritage Foundation. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.